Hello, it's Sean, and you're listening to The 3-Month Vacation. Someone asked me recently, is there a way to learn on your own? Are you self-taught, Sean? The answer is yes and no. In some cases, I was taught. In other cases, I taught myself. But if you ask me which one I prefer, the answer is very clear. I would rather be taught. And here's a real-life example from a few years ago. I started to take photography very seriously. However, the biggest problem with photos is that most of us take way too many. On a camera, which is different from a phone, this situation gets even worse because photos are shot in a format called RAW. Instead of tiny 2-megabyte pictures like the ones most of us take on our phones, my files were about 90 megabytes each. So the real question wasn't how to take photos, it was how was I supposed to download, sort, and categorize thousands of them? Most photographers run into the same problem. They download the images and they tell themselves they'll edit it someday. But thousands more photos keep piling up. Eventually, the aspiring photographer gives up entirely. I knew there had to be a way to teach myself. Surely there was a course somewhere that explained how to manage all of this. So here's what I did. I went straight to a wedding photographer and I bought a few hours of his time. A wedding photographer routinely takes thousands of photos at a single event. What software did he use? What was his method for sorting through everything? What problems would I run into? In a couple of hours of training, I learned everything I needed to know. Today, just a few years later, I have more than 40,000 well-indexed photos, and they're fully backed up. Now, if you wanted me to retrieve a specific image, I could probably find it in under 10 seconds. Best of all, I can sort through, eliminate, and process hundreds of photographs in barely half an hour. Isn't this a case against self-study? Not really. For most of us, there are 3 levels of learning. The first, self-study with a planned journey. Second, a coach that gives you concepts, but may well be a poor teacher. And third, a great coach who maps the entire journey and helps you every step of the way. Whenever possible, the third option is the best. But if you can't find that kind of teacher, then you're left with the other 2. And this is where most people run into trouble. Unfortunately, the opposite experience is also very common. I once paid about $400 to attend a 4-week French class. The logistics of getting to the course itself was quite frustrating. It took me almost 3 hours to get to the class every day, and then I had to be in the class for a couple of hours. You would imagine that such an investment of time and money would produce some kind of result, and it didn't. After weeks of effort, I learned almost nothing. This was due to the teacher's skill. She was able to teach the concepts, but was very average as a trainer. Undeterred, I invested another $1,300 with another trainer. Once again, the result was close to zero. And this is what I call the bad teacher syndrome. Most people turn to self-study not because self-study is superior, but because they've had bad experiences with teaching. After a few such experiences, they decide they are better off figuring out things themselves. And sometimes they are right. However, despite their best intentions, many people don't get very far with self-study. There are several reasons why self-study can fail. You may make progress, get stuck, and then not know how to get yourself out of that hole. Or you may start with excitement, only to find that other priorities slowly crowd out your learning. But the biggest problem with self-study is something slightly less obvious. Like everyone else, I've had all of these three experiences: a great teacher or an average trainer, and then there are times when I've had to rely entirely on self-study. So to go back to the original question, how do I make self-study actually work for me? The answer isn't about discipline or talent or even resources. To understand why, let's take a step back, and we'll go all the way back to the early Antarctic expeditions. When Ernest Shackleton prepared his 1914 Imperial Trans-Antarctic expedition, the team didn't know exactly what they would face. The ice could trap their ship for months, supplies could run out, the weather could turn deadly. Yet Shackleton was taking almost no chances. To get his men ready, he trooped them all off to the dentist. Every crew member had to have their teeth checked and treated before leaving. On an expedition that was already very costly, this added to what would be equivalent to several $1,000s today. Shackleton was preparing himself for the journey, and this brings us back to the real issue in self-study, which is the journey itself. Most people start off self-study almost like a New Year's resolution. They'll say something like, "I'm going to learn a new language," and then they'll proceed to write a few words and paste it on their fridge. Or worse still, they'll switch to Duolingo, which in my opinion is a terrible choice. In a few weeks, the entire process is derailed. On the other hand, someone who plans a Shackleton-type journey will understand that the journey is quite long. It's estimated that to learn a language like French, you'll need 100,000 repetitions of sentences before you can have a really decent conversation. If you want to be fluent, you'll need between 200,000 and 300,000 sentences. Notice that these are sentences, not words. Suddenly, Shackleton-like planning springs back to life, doesn't it? Because if you don't prepare for the journey's length, how would you possibly get there? And it's not like we don't do this level of planning. If we want to get to the airport for our flight, we have to factor in traffic, immigration, customs, etc. And then when we reach our destination, we don't say, I will figure out something. Instead, busy as we are, we plan the trip. We work out at least some of the obstacles. And this is why so many vacations, so many holidays become memorable. Yet when it comes to self-study, we rarely use the same rigor. Planning the journey is what separates those who wander aimlessly in self-study from those who make real progress. It's not enough. It's not enough to have enthusiasm or talent. You need a map. You need milestones. You need provisions along the way. Think of it like this. With photography, I didn't try to figure out 40,000 photos on my own. I planned a short coaching session. I got the right tools and organized this workflow that I needed. The journey was mapped before I even started. But when I was learning languages to begin with, I didn't have a plan. I didn't have reliable guidance. And so I stumbled for months, repeating mistakes and not making real progress. My journey was undefined, and therefore it failed. In language learning, the scale of the journey, hundreds of thousands of sentences, requires patience, pacing, and of course, structure. Without acknowledging the length, you will burn out or give up. The key insight is simple. You must treat self-study like an expedition. First, set the destination. What does success look like? Is it fluency? Is it mastery? Or just enough to get by? Then we have to estimate the distance. How much time, effort, and repetition will it realistically take? Third, we have to provision carefully. What resources, tools, habits, what do we need to help us along the way? And finally, we have to plan the route. So we break up the journey into manageable steps and have checkpoints to measure the progress. But what if you can't estimate the distance? When you start learning something on your own, you often cannot estimate how far you need to go. You don't know that it'll take 500 repetitions or 100,000. You don't know where the biggest obstacles will appear. But you can still plan the journey. You can talk to someone who has traveled that path before. You can prepare tools and systems before you begin. Again, speak to someone. And you can remove the obvious problems early, just like Shackleton removed the risk of dental emergencies. In other words, you may not know the exact distance, but you can still prepare for the expedition. Self-study fails because people often treat learning like a short stroll in the park. It works a whole lot better when you treat it like a journey across Antarctica. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. What's the one thing that you should take away? Well, it's obvious, isn't it? We are trudging across Antarctica because there are so many obstacles, so many things that we don't know anything about. And when you have a coaching situation and a really good coach, then you can afford to be slightly lax because the coach will point out what you need to do. But otherwise, this whole journey becomes so much more difficult because not only is it just the whole workload of learning, but also planning and then figuring out stuff along the way. I really like self-study, but I like coaching a whole lot more. You can't say, I'm going to have either this or that. Most of the time, we have to have a mix of both. And that's why I do have a mix of both. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. Let's find out what's happening in Psychotactics land. We're going to have the storytelling course, and storytelling is probably one of the most crucial aspects that you're going to need, not just for selling a concept or writing an article, but through life. People don't remember words. Like, do you remember what I just told you in the last few sentences? You probably don't. And yet, if you've read The Brain Audit, you remember the 7 red bag story. You probably read the book 5 years, 10 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, and you remember it to this day. So stories work, but most people find it very difficult to construct stories. They find their own stories really boring. They don't know how to go about storytelling consistently, not just the one story that you had about your travel or some story that you read somewhere, but consistently turn almost anything into a story. And that's what the storytelling course is all about. In a couple of months from now, we'll have it through the system that we always use online, and you will be coached through the entire process. So go to psychotactics.com and look for storytelling and sign up for the waiting list. And if you're a 5000 BC member, you get priority. That's it from me. I'll say bye for now. Bye-bye. Still listening? A couple of years ago, my neighbor lost 27 kilos. That's almost 60 pounds. How did she do it? Well, she had a journey. It was going to be her 50th birthday. And she decided, okay, I'm not going to be so overweight on my birthday. And so she planned a journey. She knew that it would take almost a year or a little more than that to get to where she needed to be. And so for a year, that's what she did. She binged on Fridays. She was allowed to binge on Fridays. But eventually, when she got to her 50th birthday, she was the same person, but a completely different weight. Having a journey in mind is very, very crucial, because if you don't have a journey, then nothing happens. And yes, we are going on a journey now. We're off to Greece in about 3 weeks from now. And as you would expect, we have planned everything, including some very nice hotels. I'll say bye for now. Bye-bye, and see you in 5000 BC. And don't forget to check the storytelling course. Bye-bye.